have a lot of people ask me sometimes, what is spirituality? Right? It's something that if you're not familiar with it, you've probably heard about it a lot. And typically, the types of people that ask me that question, they usually are very familiar with religion, with faith. More often than not, they identify with a particular faith, and they either grew up or as a result of societal and cultural osmosis, they've sort of picked up kind of the rules and the tenets of religion. So they have a very good background and understanding of what religion is. But when it comes to actually understanding or explaining spirituality, sometimes there are, kind of some head scratching and some blank faces at really what does that word actually mean? And on today's video, I kind of wanted to dissect that a little bit. Um, Even though the true meaning of spirituality can't really be expressed or understood through words or concepts or ideas, I'm hoping that if you do have a little bit of uncertainty, or if you know someone that has uncertainty, that by the end of this video, hopefully we shed a little bit more light as to what is spirituality, right? Why does it matter? What is it really? And to start with, I thought it would be helpful to just kind of focus on the word for a moment, right? I love words. I believe that it's so important for us to try to understand not only words, but also what they actually mean. What are they composed of? What are kind of the root or the core words that make up the actual word that's in focus? And if you pay particular attention to the word spirituality, you'll notice that the word spirit is kind of the root word. It's the first part of that, the major part of that word, right? So if we were to dissect, what is spirituality? My first answer would be, well, let's point out what spirituality actually includes, and that's the spirit. Now, the spirit obviously has its own set of definitions or descriptions or sort of ways of kind of looking at it, but I think many of us can naturally resonate or have a sense of what that word really means, right? Spirit is our soul. Spirit is our true essence. And so, in a role that prioritizes the mind and the body, which are physical, which are tangible, which everyone can point to and everyone can identify with, spirituality attempts to do something totally different, which is focusing on the unseen, focusing on the unknown, right? Trying to get to the core of who we really are, which is, of course, spirit. Now, spirit, as I mentioned, can have a lot of different interpretations, a lot of different flavors. And the way I always like to think about it, because sometimes the words spirit and soul are very interchangeable, we each have an individual soul, right? If you were to look at yourself in the mirror, you might see your physical appearance, you might see your natural reflection, but deep down, and you can't see this in a mirror, of course, but deep down, you have a soul. And deep down, I have a soul. And every single person that has lived, has ever lived, will ever live, and is currently living has a soul. But there's also something called the spirit. And the spirit, you can kind of think of it as, and I know I use this analogy a lot, so if it sounds familiar, hopefully it resonates right away. But the ocean is one, right? When we think of the ocean, we don't think of all of the individual little drops of water that make up the ocean. But that's essentially what the ocean is. The ocean is a collection of seemingly infinite number of drops. And each of those drops can be likened to human souls. And when you put all of those souls together, you get spirit. You get the ocean. And spirit really, if you think about it, that is the essence of God. So when you put all of the souls together, you're essentially arriving at a reflection of God, a reflection of the divine. So when we go back to the term spirituality, it's really the I don't want to call it the science, but it's really sort of the study and the understanding and the discovery of one's true nature, realizing that we are not just a drop in the ocean, we are the entire ocean in a drop. And of course, that quote is not mine. Many of you know it's from Rumi, who is arguably one of the greatest spiritual teachers of all time. Not just a poet, not just a mystic, someone that, if you're familiar with this channel, you'll know that I reference his work quite a bit. I have done videos on some of his poems and spiritual teachings before. But the gist of the matter is spirituality is the understanding of the soul, understanding of the self. Now, how does this differ from religion, right? Because there are a lot of similarities, but there's also some important differences. It's typically the case that when we grow up, when we sort of mature as young adults and eventually adults, more often than not, we're exposed to religion before we're exposed to spirituality. I've seen some cases where it's reversed, but typically it's a lot easier for people to grasp religion than it is for them to grasp spirituality. Because, and I'll kind of break down some of the reasons why, but at the crux of it, religion is something that has kind of been standardized for the whole universe throughout several different generations. It rarely changes. It's usually governed by a prescribed set of rules, set of sort of, guiding parameters. It's usually, obviously founded by one particular person. There's usually a holy book or a set of scriptures that contain and constitute many of the rules and regulations and sort of ways of living. But if you think about religion, the primary purpose, and I know we all have different opinions about it because it is a very polarizing subject sometimes, but if you really dissect religion at its core, at its spirit, pun intended, the purpose of religion is to help society return back to God, right? Because without any sort of faith, without any sort of compass, we don't have a means to reconnect with the beloved, right? We easily get distracted by all the different roles and responsibilities of life, whether that's our career, our family, our ambitions, our goals, our struggles, our sacrifices. And so when you think about it, that even though we have 24 hours in the day, 8 hours goes to sleep, the other 16 waking hours goes to all these other activities that we mentioned. And without a sense of faith or without a sense of religion or spirituality, many of us just simply won't allocate that time to God, to really discovering our true purpose towards returning back to God. So religion, and obviously there's some differences depending on what religion you subscribe to or believe in. And I won't try to go into all the different religions. So if you're looking for that, I'm sure there's other videos out there on YouTube and elsewhere that can kind of help you explain, what is Buddhism, what is Christianity, what is Islam. They're all very fascinating. I can tell you in my younger years, I've spent a lot of time, not just in the own faith that I grew up in, which is Islam, but other faiths as well. Very fascinating, sort of the historical teachings, the spiritual teachings, the historical leaders and influencers. There's so much that you can learn from every single religion, even though you might not particularly subscribe to it. But religion at its core is meant to help man or woman, or, without getting into, different sort of classifications, to help society return back to God. Now, how does this differ from spirituality? Well, spirituality is very similar to that goal, but one of the fundamental differences between religion and spirituality is that in religion, one's path is pretty much more or less defined, meaning there's a certain way, there's a certain practice that is either encouraged or explicitly prescribed for people to follow. So I'll give you an example. In Islam, Muslims pray 5 times a day, right? It's the required, but also the encouraged way of communing with God, of speaking with God, of connecting with God, right? And so there's certain times of the day that one is expected to pray. Can they pray more? Of course. But it's generally recommended that those 5 times be observed, right? And one should not miss those times, right? There's ways to kind of make up for it, but without getting into the technicalities of it, a proper Muslim or a true Muslim is expected by society and sort of by the foundational pillars of Islam to pray 5 times a day. And there's other sorts of practices, that come with that, right? Such as fasting during the month of Ramadan. Can you fast any other month of the year? Of course. But that's sort of the one month that all Muslims or most Muslims usually observe, usually fast for the entire month. And as I mentioned, there's other sorts of practices that a true Muslim or a pure Muslim is expected to follow. But for the most part, it's already governed, right? It's not like someone can just come today and say, well, I understand that Muslims practice in Ramadan, but I'm going to change that, right? It's not like you can, like the constitution of a country where you can vote on it and you can pass laws that can change the constitution. You can't change the Quran. You can't change the Bible. You can't change the Torah. You can't change these things. They're pretty much set in stone. And that's why you have these religions that have amassed an amazing following and an amazing supporter and follower base over the years. And they just keep continuing to grow because it's easy to understand, it's easy to relate to. Everything's kind of spelled out for you. And as long as you follow those things, then, presumably you should be able to connect to God. But then why doesn't everyone fall into kind of these perfect, neat little buckets? Why are there some people that are outside of kind of the box of religion? Either they don't necessarily subscribe to a religion or they subscribe to something that can't easily be characterized, such as spirituality. Spirituality is something that transcends religions. There's really no such thing as a spiritual Muslim or a spiritual Christian, because the whole essence of spirituality is to transcend religion. So it's kind of an oxymoron when you combine those two words together, when you combine it together. Where spirituality goes one step further is recognizing that, yes, while religion may have sort of the foundation, it doesn't really set the path forward, meaning one has to, through their own experiences, through their own understanding, carve their own path. And sometimes this unique path doesn't necessarily align well with the rigid and sort of the standardized path that is prescribed by a certain religion, right? If a certain religion has, 1 billion or 2 billion followers, well, it's very hard for every single one of those 2 billion people to fit 100% perfect in that religion. And so that's where spirituality comes into play. Spirituality is something that usually a lot of the people that today that quote unquote practice spirituality have come from an established religious background, either through their childhood or through their younger years, such as myself, only to realize that while religion is great and beautiful and provides an excellent base and foundation, it doesn't really solve the problems beyond that, right? And that's where one has to use their own judgment. One has to use their own sort of gifts and abilities and mind and curiosity and self-discovery to really understand, well, how can I strengthen this connection with God even further? Now, I know some people who might be listening to this, maybe they come from a more traditional or purist religious backgrounds. They might categorize what I'm saying as blasphemy, as doing something that's against what God wants. And I respect everyone. I respect everyone's viewpoints. This topic is always a contentious topic, and I'm not trying to sweep that fact under the rug. But what I will say is that I've learned through my own experiences that it's not enough to just follow a certain prescribed path. One has to kind of find their own path. And for me, growing up, I was always, and still am, the curious type. I would always wonder, well, why does it have to be this way? Why do we do this? Right? Why are innocent animals sacrificed for a tradition or for a particular religious service when, God doesn't need a dead goat or a dead sheep? God is so much greater than that. God is infinitely wiser, has everything. And so we just need to clean our hearts. We need to give him love and give him attention directly rather than doing an ancient practice that has no bearing or no purpose in today's society, and instead does more harm to society, by killing innocent animals rather than doing any benefit for us. So those are the types of questions and things that I struggled with a lot growing up. And it wasn't just one or two, if you can take my word for it. There was a lot of things that just did not make sense to me. And I realized very early on that, I'd have to kind of set my own path and I have to do something that sits right with me. Now, a lot of people don't want to do that. And I'm not suggesting that everyone is curious, everyone wants to push the envelope. Not in a rebellious way, but just in a way of understanding, well, what sits right with me. Right. We all have something that feels right, that gives us a very good vibe, that gives us a good feeling at the end of the day. And for me, I discovered that very quickly in spirituality. I loved the openness of just being able to shift and taking the best from everything, right? Just because today I identify with spirituality doesn't mean that there aren't things that I don't still use or refer to in religion. In fact, I have a deeper appreciation of religion now that I'm quote unquote outside of it or looking beyond looking through religion rather than being stuck in religion and not seeing what's out there, not seeing what's beyond the parameters. There's this beautiful sort of image or visual. Some of you may have seen it on social media. It's very popular, but it shows a fish that's in a fishbowl, and that fishbowl is submerged in the ocean. And that fish that's in the fishbowl is looking out at the other fish, specifically one fish that is in the ocean swimming freely. And the fish in the fishbowl feels trapped because he can't get out of the fishbowl, right? The top of the fishbowl is enclosed. And so they're really just stuck in this little fishbowl, barely enough room to kind of move around, to operate. Whereas this other fish that's staring at the fish in the fishbowl is in the ocean and can swim freely to wherever its heart desires, is not contained, is not bound to anything. And sort of the main punchline or the caption is that the person that is in the fishbowl, the fish that is trapped in the fishbowl, there's a tag that says religion. And then the fish that is in the ocean, that is free, that is unencumbered, that isn't trapped, there's a caption underneath that says spirituality. So anytime I see that picture or anytime I think about it, it's such a perfect analogy for what is religion and what is spirituality, right? And a lot of the times, many of us don't want to explore spirituality because A, it is unknown. B, there's no sort of guarantee, right? The deeper you venture into the forest of spirituality, you don't really know what you're going to find. You don't know where your journey is going to end. There is no certainty. And so a lot of people don't like that. They like certainty. They don't want to take risks. They don't want to leave their comfort zone. It is frightening. And that's, that kind of hits the head on one of the reasons or one of the main reasons why people do not want to stray too far from religion. And it all comes down to fear. Fear of not being accepted, fear of not attaining salvation, fear of not going to heaven, fear of being judged by others who may be practicing the faith, fear of being outcasted or ostracized by, religious leaders or religious society. So you could see there's so much different fear within that person. And believe me, I used to have this fear as well too. I used to have that fear that not so much about what others thought, but more so the fear of, well, if I don't do this a certain way, the way that I was taught as a child, will God accept me? Will God love me? Will I be banished to hell? And it took me a while to realize what hell and heaven really are. And it was only through sort of breaking out of that prison, breaking out of those chains, that I started to develop a deeper understanding of what these concepts really mean. And all of a sudden, I saw my fear kind of slowly slip away. And I just got so much peace from spirituality. And that brings me to another difference. Not to generalize here, because we have to be very careful. This doesn't apply to everyone. But in my own experiences, I found that religion was heavily dominated by fear, by law and order, by following a certain path. Yes, there was elements of love, but it was equally tied to elements of punishment and elements of fear and elements of retribution. Whereas in spirituality, and this was a common sort of distinction for me, spirituality for me, the prevailing feeling has always been that of peace, right? If I'm to describe spirituality in one sense, it's peace. There is no high, there is no low, there is just pure, ecstatic, unadulterated peace. And to me, that's really what I've been after my whole life, is a sense of peace, a sense of calm. And to me, that speaks volumes. That resonates so deeply. It's not when I'm happy, right? Like when I was younger and I was learning how to gain quote unquote rewards or how to go to heaven. Yes, there was a feeling of excitement. Yes, there was a feeling of happiness, but that would quickly be offset by fears of maybe not doing things the right way. And sometimes I noticed that I would do things not so much because I saw the benefit of it, but because I saw the fear of not doing it. Right? If I felt like, oh my goodness, I can't I can't miss a prayer because if I do, then that's going to affect me down the line. And when it's the day of judgment, how am I going to respond to God? So all of a sudden, it became very easy for me to get sucked into that narrative of fear rather than, if I'm going to pray to God, if I'm going to speak to my Creator, why not just do it from a place of complete love, from a place of complete desire? Because truth be told, God doesn't need my prayers. God doesn't need anyone's prayers. I'm doing this for my own self. And if I'm doing this for my own self, then I have to do it from a place that I truly want to do this. Not because there is a reward attached to it, not because there's a punishment I can avoid, but because I truly want to do this. And where I learned this very profoundly was in reading and studying a lot of Sufi literature, Sufi poetry. In particular, there's sort of one teacher or master that I really respect and admire a lot, and his name is Attar. Another Sufi master that I featured a lot in this channel. For those of you who don't know, he was one of Rumi's teachers, came before Rumi's time. Their paths did cross for a bit, but mostly Attar was kind of in his later years when a young Rumi crossed paths with him and was inspired by some of his work. But in one of his lesser known works, Attar, and it's something that I usually will read as well when I do my prayers, is to kind of summarize the gist of it. Attar is basically saying that he loves God so much, right? This is a prayer that he says to God. I love you so much that you can burn my entire existence into the ground, and all you will find in my ashes is you. Now think about that for a moment. you can burn my entire existence to the ground, and all you will find in my ashes is you. Attar later goes on to say that I don't need anything in this world, and I don't need heaven or anything in the next world. All I need is you. Such profound statements, right? You ask many people today who subscribe to a religion, you ask them today, would you still be doing what you're doing today if at the end of all of this, God didn't give you the reward of heaven, or God didn't give you the reward of salvation? And I can almost guarantee you that most, if not all of those people would say no, right? They don't want to admit it, but the fact of the matter is that a lot of us, unfortunately, we have the wrong intention. We're seeking a goal rather than seeking God. And this is a fundamental difference, right? This is something that religion sometimes struggles with distinguishing. There's so many goals, there's so many people, there's so many intermediaries, there's so many steps, there's so many houses of worship, there's so many teachings that in the midst of all this, chaos and confusion, we struggle to realize that there's just one God, right? There's just one path. There's only one God. And that should be our ultimate focus at the end of the day. That is our ultimate focus. I always tell people that if something brings you close to God, you're doing a wonderful thing. And if something brings you away from God, you're doing the wrong thing. There are religious rules out there that discourage or prohibit a woman that is going through her menstrual cycle from trying to connect with God because she is impure. Now, is this God that doesn't want a woman that is going through that to be closer to him? Or is this a male-dominated hierarchy? Because if you think about it, all founding religions, just like society as a whole, has always had a patriarchal and a male-dominated undercurrent that sometimes gets forgotten or gets misunderstood, right? But it is true, right? There are vast, vast differences between the male and the female in religions. And it's unfortunate. And we try to justify it. And I've seen a lot of different people, very educated people who have, a certain level of education, they try to justify this difference. But to me, there is no difference. In the eyes of the Creator, there is no difference. We are all one. Yes, there may be surface level differences, right? A male cannot give birth to a baby. There's different aspects, and their reality. It's just a part of reality. But at our core, we are all the same. And spirituality at its core sees no difference between the male and the female, because spirituality at its core sees no difference in duality. They are both one, right? In fact, the whole purpose of spirituality, in addition to helping us return back to God, is to eliminate any sort of notion of duality and to simply just see the one. Simply just see God. So I hope that, in the course of this video so far, there's a lot that can be expounded upon even further. And I can talk about this topic for hours and hours and hours. But in the spirit of keeping this video kind of similar in length to the other videos, I just wanted to kind of highlight some of these differences and highlight, not to sort of sway you towards one or the other. I promise I'm not trying to make everyone quote unquote spiritual. I've learned very early on in my life that when it comes to matters of faith, when it comes to matters of belief, you can be there, you can be a reference, you can be a guide, you can be a platform or a sounding board for others, but you can't tell anyone what to do, right? Everyone has to come to their own conclusion. Everyone has to come to their own path. And for me, I have no agenda. Believe me, I'm not trying to convince people to follow one way or the other. As long as we can live in harmony, as long as we can live in peace, as long as we can respect one another's views and go beyond mere tolerance, but trying to actually understand it. Because as I mentioned, even today, where I may not practice all of the different tenets of religion, there's a lot that I still very deeply respect and admire. I mentioned my, prayers. I do pray, but perhaps not in the way many people or many Muslims might think of as prayer. I do connect with God. I do fast from time to time. But when I do it, I try to do it from a perspective of let me move aside sort of the rules and the things that you need to follow, and let me get to the spirit and the crux of everything. It's not important to do what you need to do. It's important to understand why you do the things that you do. And just simply saying, well, because this educated scholar said it, or this person told me to do it, or my parents said this, or their grandparents said this, that's not enough. You have to understand and question everything on your own. And even though it might feel a little uncomfortable, even though it might feel like you're being disrespectful or blasphemous, believe me, there's a way to do it with grace, with respect, with honor. And at the end of the day, you're really just doing justice and service to your own soul. You're really trying to strengthen your relationship with God because you don't want a superficial relationship with God. You want a deep, natural, and justified relationship with God. That you understand every single thing that you're doing. That you're not just trying to do anything to get a reward or to escape a certain punishment, but that you genuinely love God to every bone and fiber in your body. And that you'd be willing to let your existence burn to the ground, like Attar says, because that's how much you love God. That's how much you appreciate Him not only putting you on this earth to begin with, but more importantly, letting you breathe, letting you live your life every single day. To me, what is it that we cannot give to God, right? If Abraham can sacrifice his own son, who are we that we can't sacrifice a few minutes of our day or an hour of our day or a few moments of the week to do something genuinely, to do something that will really strengthen our relationship with God? We can use religion as the base. Again, this video is not an attack or a criticism of religion because there's so much beauty to religion. I always say it gets you halfway there, right? It gets you halfway there. It gives you the building blocks to understand spirituality because believe me, trying to explain spirituality to a young mind is very difficult. Trying to explain spirituality to a rebellious teenager can be very difficult. So everything starts, you can't teach calculus to a first grader unless they must be some, one-of-a-kind prodigy. You have to kind of start with the basics of mathematics and kind of build and progress their knowledge to get to that point where they can understand calculus. So think of spirituality as calculus. I don't know if that analogy fits necessarily, but again, I really do, thank you all for taking some time. I'm sure you have a lot of opinions on this topic as well. As I mentioned, it is polarizing. Usually in my social circles, there's a lot of debate and there's a lot good debate, right? I'm not saying that it's bad. It's something that we do need to debate. It's something that we do need to discuss because we need to understand each other's viewpoints. As I always say, you can always take a fruit from every tree. Just because you grow an apple tree doesn't mean you can only eat apples. Go around the garden, pick up an orange, pick up a pear, pick up some of these other fruits. And the same is true with your life, with your development. Just because you subscribe to one belief or one path in life doesn't mean all you're going to learn is from that one path. Meet other people, especially people that walk from a different path of life, people that believe in something slightly or even greatly different than you, because there's fruits that you can get from their trees and put in your basket. And in this way, you become a much more well-rounded, much more compassionate, and a much more God-loving person. So with that, thank you all for taking some time. I know this video is getting a little bit on the longer side, so I promise to wrap it up. If you enjoyed it, please drop a like. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And please consider subscribing to the channel. As I mentioned, I'm always trying to create new videos every week as best as I can to really cover topics that hopefully are relevant and practical, not just superficial or abstract or kind of things that are interesting to dabble in, but really things that matter to our life and can make a difference in that life, hopefully. If you feel like that's, these videos are doing a service to you, please consider subscribing. It's amazing how, when I look at some of the analytics, a lot of the people that watch these videos are not subscribers. So if we can just get some of you guys to actually subscribe, then, that can help grow this channel. That can help get it in front of others who may be interested in this content as well. Yeah, I appreciate your time as always. I wish you a wonderful day and week ahead. I wish you continued success on your own spiritual journey, wherever that may take you, however that may, manifest. But ultimately, I appreciate you. I recognize and honor the spirit in you, which is also the spirit in me. And I look forward to seeing you next time.